Hello, everyone. Okay. Well, beautiful Sunday. This past week, I attended a conference, academic conference for criminal justice, which, of course, is kind of my um, expertise, if you will. It was a very good conference. I sat on two different panels. The first one was about navigating the complexities in research curriculum and technology in classrooms. And while we were talking all as academics, one of the very poignant discussions was mostly surrounded about AI. The buzz is around AI, and to me, it was not a positive buzz. Now, disclaimer: I am not talking on behalf of any institution. This is my own thoughts. I will not say outward names, not necessarily of people, but of organizations and institutions. This is I want to say when I talk about, I'm looking at the majority because based on not only the discussions during this conference, but discussions with other professionals and academics within criminal justice, within the intelligence community, the crime analysis community. It's a talk of a good game on critical thinking. We see a lot of talk about AI, but two different things really stood out, and both of them were very alarming to me. But these are also things that I already know and I've put out in my writings, and we've had discussions online, and we've had topics of articles, and two things that I'll talk about quickly here. That the first one is critical thinking skills. I was floored when, between these two panels with, a dozen or so people in each one, and then, of course, fellow panelists. We as instructors, as professors who hold doctorates and PhDs and tout that we have been working in these fields for 20, 30 years, the lack of actual knowledge or surrounding critical thinking, it's interesting and yet saddening at the same time when I hear and then I question other professionals when they say, well, I teach critical thinking, or I put critical thinking into my classroom or into my curriculum, that's really not true. Again, they're utilizing these words as buzzwords, not really. I mean, I put out the quick words of, okay, so when was the last time somebody picked up a philosophy book? No one raised their hand in either room, not even members of the panel. Well, one person did. But that was caveated with, it's been a while. But it doesn't matter, our discipline. No one picks up a philosophy book. Why are we not, if we're criminal justice professionals, criminal intelligence analysts, analysts at large, even crime analysts, why are we not picking up philosophy book? Yes, you can say, well, that doesn't matter. Well, it's just not philosophy. Philosophy, remember, teaches us a community of inquiry, gives us a perspective and a position on how we, as professionals, as doctors, forward the social sciences to explain crime, to explain why things happen, why they don't happen. When I ask the question then of, can anybody tell me? from the logic standpoint, what is the basis of an argument? That we should be asking these things of our students, especially in this day of AI, because AI can't give us the real so what for from the human aspect. That when we look at argumentation, we expect students at all levels, undergrad, but to varying degrees, from undergraduate all the way to doctoral, even postgraduate. Then tell me how that argument was constructed. We're not teaching any kind of construction or deconstruction at any of these levels. And yes, I say at any of these levels because, again, as I talk to more and more practitioners and professionals, no one reads about critical thinking. When we read critical thinking about intelligence or analysis from the crime or even the national security perspective, it's all about, well, all source. We need to take different sources and look at them. And what do they corroborate each other? Do they tell us a different story? Well, that's okay, and it's somewhat true. It's not the whole way to think about a problem, but a position, and then putting up the argument. An argument, when was the last time you or I picked up a book on logic, rhetoric, really dived into the formulas that create critical thinking? Again, I started argument because there has to be an argument in order to be able to go look at the purpose of doing some research to answer that argument, whether you are supporting or refuting that argument. We're not getting into this technical aspect of it, which is just very disheartening as a practitioner. We're not passing that on to our students, to asking them how, put together, show us how you put this argument together. What is the argument? What's the statement? And then what are the premise? We're not asking the premise. I catch this more and more, even at the doctoral level, that here's your argument, but you provide no premise to it. And then what's the therefore to the conclusion? When we have, say, let's pick 3 premise. When we look at the 3, all 3 have to be true in order for therefore the conclusion to provide that it's true. If we have 3 premise, 2 are true, 1's false, therefore you cannot say the conclusion is it's true. It would have to be false and you just don't, it's not as easy as just changing out a premise. You now have to go in and talk about the argument of that premise to prove it true, or you need to change your argument. We don't do that. These practitioners and professionals and academics and scholars that I talk to have touted that they've been teaching for 1, 2, 3, even some 4 decades. Are you doing your job? And I got to say, this is part of the dumbing down of our degrees. We no longer ask the hard questions. Our students expect A's when maybe it's a C-level work, but the institutions also say, now, wait, now you can't fail everybody. Or you, as a professor, get a bad reputation. And it is about course observances and end of course observations. And we want the, I love Professor so-and-so, and oh my gosh, they were great. But were they really great? Do we really pen journalistic articles that are hard-hitting enough to call each other out and say, you're not using critical thinking in your classroom? You're not putting together the curriculum that makes these students challenged enough that they have to go back, because I don't think that as professionals we even know unless you really look at, and I'll say I'm one of those in my classes that I too am intimidated enough to not institute a lot about critical thinking, and the rubrics really aren't written towards driving higher level critical thinking, thinking deeper. And so that's why I continue to write on critical thinking and trying to provide micro protocols, um, have that people understand their own metacognition, let alone I have students who I don't think are cognitively ready to be at the levels they are. And we're setting up people to fail. We're setting up our own institutions to fail ourselves. It starts with us as faculty. That one thing everybody can agree upon was that we weren't really being as harsh as I think we should be when it comes to the teaching. That are we really putting together the hardness? Like, I'm still even at the graduate level, and that's both master's and PhD level, that individuals are not ready for that level of attainment, that students still can't put together a coherent introduction paragraph that has a problem, a purpose, a position, an argument. And I use position and argument synonymously here. And in all my writing, position and argument, and then a clearly defined thesis. I still find that introduction paragraphs are missing those quintessential, very specific items. They're not giving us a clear problem, and I can pick apart the problem and say, and ask what premise was based on this argument. And was that argument, therefore, the conclusion true or false? Which one are you trying to prove? Then the purpose, if you have the problem, you have an argument, what's the purpose really of proving this argument true or false? And then can they really understand what a clearly identified thesis statement is, let alone really dive into the body? And that's disheartening as well, that it seems they just believe a literature review is proving their case. There's no synthesis, very little analysis, because no one wants to dive into the demonstrative critical thinking aspect and how that is done, why it's done, if it's done properly. There is, like I said, there's a lot of readings out there, and I think some of it are just diatribes, the regurgitation of the low level critical thinking, um, and yet not boosting. Students aren't taught to understand or identify fallacies in their thinking. Being able to identify, if they do identify a fallacy, they don't list it and then they don't counter it. And then talking about no one uses counter arguments in their reviews of student work. It seems like we're just still, the rubrics are based on the clarity of writing, writing mechanics, APA, Turabian, Chicago, and we're still worried about plagiarism. Well, plagiarism is going to happen because we have this lower level thinking. And again, that's just devastating to me. I'm guilty of it. Don't take this as I'm trying to call you out. Sorry, something in my eye. But that we're just not leveling up based on undergrad, graduate, doctoral, even postdoctoral work. I don't think the intelligence community, as well as the crime analytic community, is always geared towards really, do they need to follow back onto that academic and scholar, because not everything is just a bulletin. It's just not a bolo. It's there's studies, there's assessments. And I think the cadre largely is not taught this. When hired, they look at degrees You have a bachelor's degree, you have a master's degree, therefore you can do this job. You can write somewhat semi-coherently. Then they say, well, there's a lot of on-the-job training. We're going to train you to do the things that we do or the way that we do it. And again, we're not getting into the academics, and where I think that's where we should be back, even in service academies and such, when we're teaching an analysis. We're not doing that. Then let's go to the second. Again, this is I talk all day long on this, so I can do tens of 20s and 30s, thousands of hours of discussion on critical thinking. We're not leveling up. We're not teaching ourselves our own cognitive abilities, capabilities, and then really understanding the meta cognition that we have, because we allow issues to come in like bias, assumptions that are political bias because, well, I'm a left or I'm a right. This person's a left or a right. I don't view this as a terrorist. I view that as a terrorist. I don't view this as criminal. I view that as criminal. Um, it almost seems like there's picking a side. No one's on the fence, kind of looking over each side, making a judgment call, not necessarily one way or another, but explaining how it could be both, one or both. But then that second argument of now we have AI, when academics and scholars, faculty, talk a good game of knowing AI, but how many have certifications? I don't. Is it necessary? No, I don't think it is, because certifications kind of give you this level of expertise. I think in this day and age, because AI rapidly changes, that you can have a certificate from yesterday, but it's going to be outdated by next week. AI is going to continue to grow in its uses and tools. It's got to be looked at as a research tool. How many academics I talked to over this past week said, yep, I use AI to help me with grading. Okay, that's good. And we kind of use it also to speed up that grading. It's good at picking out some of these things, but it also, how well are we versed in the prompts and looking at wanting to get this information? But then are we putting that personal touch? Are the students prepared for it? Because I have had in the past week and a half, about a week and a half ago, I had a student complain to the senior leadership of one of the institutions that they felt that I used AI in grading their paper. Their paper was a 2 to 3 page essay. Um, and yes, I used AI to help me scrub through it, but I also used dictation. I put in my personal, and then I had AI help me rewrite my thought process. And it turned out to be about 4.5 pages single spaced writing, but it went from top to bottom. It went through the rubric. I went through the rubric. I was still correcting mechanics, grammar, punctuation, yet here we live in a time that you have everything from Grammarly, Quillbot, you have AI, whether you're using any of the APIs like Grok or Claude, um, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini. Um, they can help you, but students are like, well, I'm not going to, and students alike, I don't use it because I'm afraid of being accused and given an academic integrity violation. Well, we're also not telling students, use it. Caveat in your writings that AI was used in the development. As long as, we're not asking them and they're not doing a cut and paste of exactly what it puts out, because there's no analysis. There's no real so what for. I look at a bottom line up front. Tell me what the problem is, why it's a problem. AI doesn't necessarily do that unless you specifically write in a prompt. And that's part of the deficiencies, that faculty and students don't know how to use AI. Very little AI training. that would give students and faculty a level up. We're afraid to use these tools as research assistants. They are great. They cut off time that you can be spent thinking more analytically about the information that's given, or even the lack of information. We're not giving exercises built and integrated with AI tools that can level up the student activity, because we are in an age that technology is advanced so far. But students aren't using it, faculty aren't encouraging it, and yet institutions aren't encouraging, um, because we're not seeing institutions, because this was the other question I asked, was, are institutions providing faculty and students with AI tools? And most of them are like, no. Well, I can understand from a business standpoint and from the, again, rapidly growing. Now, some have said, yep, Microsoft with Copilot has now been integrated into the LMS. That's great. Um, and so are we now redeveloping some curriculums that it will take the student from that use of AI just to do a check in the box of cutting and pasting directions and then having it spit out an assignment, but that they have to use AI for certain research, but that AI can't level up to providing that physical, mental, that meaning the cognitive and the metacognition aspect of learning. So can we apply these learning tools? I think that we need to. And it was, again, disheartening to hear both the critical thinking aspect and the AI, and then the fusion of both, how we can provide better learning for students. I think it's also pushing students to that level of, why don't we have critical thinking courses? Yes, a real course in critical thinking that may have part 1 and 2, even if they're, say, 8 weeks or 10 weeks long, double it. Because we got to start, if we look at, and I always push, probably one of the best books out of all the critical thinking books I've read. And it's non-disciplinary, so it's very wide spectrum critical thinking, pushing philosophy, having people understand what philosophy they can identify with. And, whether it's Plato or Aristotle, or we go to Russell Bertrand, or we go back to Nietzsche or Hume and Locke, again, Kant, Mills, we have all these hundreds of philosophers. We can even bring in the Stoics and the Cynics, because I think opening students' minds to new perspectives from the philosophical standpoint is only going to get better, make them better. As institutions, we become better at teaching. Our faculty expertise becomes heavier and deeper in the critical thinking aspect of not just philosophy, but of the concepts and the theoretical frameworks that we teach. We're not doing that efficiently enough. We're not pushing that enough. Um, and then as a society, of course, we have doom scrolling on social media and such. So I think using and pushing AI is one of those very significant things. I know I've spoken for about 24 minutes, and I'm going to end it here today as a live, but I know it's, of course, going to be here for quite a while, for us to revisit and maybe even add on. Thank you for listening. Take care.